always thought the worst thing that could happen to a person was to be forgotten. I never imagined that the people I loved most would be the ones to try and erase me from my own life. My name is Evelyn, and I'm 74 years old. I've lived in the same house for nearly 50 years, raised 3 children, buried a husband, and survived more storms than I care to count. I've always believed in the power of family, in the strength of love, and in the quiet dignity of growing old with grace. But nothing prepared me for the day my own children decided I was too much trouble to keep around. It started with small things, the kind you almost don't notice until they pile up and block out the sun. My eldest, Mark, began stopping by more often, always with a forced smile and a bag of groceries I hadn't asked for. "Just checking in, Mom," he'd say, glancing around the kitchen as if he expected to find me collapsed on the floor. My daughter, Lisa, called every evening, her voice syrupy sweet, asking if I'd remembered to take my pills, if I'd eaten, if I'd locked the doors. My youngest, David, barely called at all, but when he did, it was always the same question. "Are you sure you're okay living alone?" First, I told myself they were just worried. After all, I'd had a bad fall last winter, slipped on the icy steps and bruised my hip. I spent a week in the hospital, and I could see the fear in their eyes when they visited. But I recovered. I went to physical therapy, did my exercises, and was back to tending my garden by spring. Still, the questions kept coming, the visits grew more frequent, and the sense of being watched crept into every corner of my life. Then came the day Mark showed up with a woman I'd never met. She was young, maybe 30, with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is Emily," Mark said. "She's a social worker. Just here to make sure you're getting all the help you need." Emily walked through my house, making notes, asking questions about my medications, my finances, my daily routine. I felt like a child being inspected, my independence weighed and measured by strangers. After she left, Mark sat me down at the kitchen table. "Mom, we're just worried about you. You're not as young as you used to be. What if something happens and no one's here to help?" I looked at him, really looked, and saw the impatience flicker behind his concern. "I appreciate your worry, Mark," I said, "but I'm not helpless. I've managed just fine." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "We just want what's best for you." That phrase, "what's best for you," became a refrain, repeated by all 3 of my children over the next few weeks. They started bringing me brochures for assisted living facilities, each one more cheerful and sanitized than the last. "Look, Mom, they have bingo nights and a beauty salon," Lisa chirped, waving a glossy pamphlet in my face. David sent me links to websites, testimonials from smiling seniors who claimed their lives had never been better. I smiled politely, thanked them for their concern, and quietly shredded every brochure as soon as they left. But the pressure didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. Mark began dropping by unannounced, letting himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago. He'd walk through the house, checking the stove, the locks, the mail. Lisa started calling my neighbors, asking them to keep an eye on Mom. David, who lived 2 states away, began hinting that maybe it was time for me to downsize and move closer to him. I felt the walls closing in, my world shrinking with every well-meaning intrusion. Then one afternoon I found Lisa in my bedroom, rifling through my dresser drawers. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She jumped, cheeks flushing. "I was just looking for your insurance papers, Mom. You know, in case of an emergency." I stared at her, heart pounding. "If you need something, you ask me. You don't go through my things." She mumbled an apology, but I could see the resentment simmering beneath her embarrassment. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills and letters in front of me. I felt old, truly old, for the first time in my life. Not because my body was failing, but because my children had decided I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. I thought about my husband, gone these 10 years, and wondered what he would say if he could see us now. He always said I was the strongest woman he knew. I wondered if I still was. The next morning, I called my friend Margaret. She's 81, sharp as a tack, and has lived alone since her husband passed. "They're circling, aren't they?" she said, not unkindly. "Like vultures. My kids tried the same thing last year. You have to be careful, Evie. Once they get it in their heads that you can't manage, it's hard to convince them otherwise." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What did you do?" I asked. She lowered her voice, conspiratorial. I made a plan. You need one too. That night I started my own plan. I made a list of everything I still did for myself: cooking, cleaning, paying bills, tending the garden, driving to the store. I wrote down the names of my doctors, my lawyer, my bank manager. I gathered my important documents and put them in a safe place. I called my lawyer, Mr. Harris, and asked him to review my will and power of attorney. Just making sure everything's in order, I told him. He didn't ask questions, just scheduled an appointment. The next week, Mark and Lisa showed up together. Their faces set in matching masks of concern. "Mom, we need to talk," Mark began. I braced myself. "We've found a wonderful place for you," Lisa said, sliding a brochure across the table. "It's close to us and you'll have your own room. They have activities, meals, everything you need." I looked at the brochure, then at my children. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm not ready to leave my home." Mark's jaw tightened. "Mom, you have to be realistic. You can't live here forever." I smiled a small secret smile. "We'll see about that." The days that followed were a strange mix of ordinary and ominous. I went about my routines, watering the roses, baking bread, chatting with neighbors, but I could feel the tension humming beneath the surface. My children's visits became more frequent, their questions more pointed. "Did you remember to take your medication, Mom? Are you sure you locked the back door? Maybe you should let us handle your bills from now on." Each question was a pebble in my shoe, small but impossible to ignore. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, the phone rang. It was David, his voice unusually brisk. "Mom, I've been talking to Mark and Lisa. We're all worried about you. We think it's time you considered moving somewhere safer." I closed my eyes, gripping the receiver. "David, I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine. I'm not ready to leave my home." There was a pause, then a sigh. "We just want what's best for you." The words echoed in my mind long after I hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house. I thought about all the memories held within these walls, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments of contentment. I thought about the garden I'd planted with my husband, the kitchen where I'd taught my children to cook, the living room where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays. This house was more than just a building. It was the story of my life. I wasn't ready to let it go. The next morning I called Mr. Harris, my lawyer. "I need to make sure my affairs are in order," I told him. He agreed to meet me at his office that afternoon. I gathered my documents, will, power of attorney, bank statements, and drove to his office, my hand steady on the wheel. Mr. Harris greeted me with a warm smile. "Evelyn, it's good to see you. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, careful not to let my voice tremble. "My children think I can't take care of myself. They want me to move into a nursing home. I need to make sure my wishes are clear." He nodded, his expression serious. "We can update your will and power of attorney to reflect your wishes. And if you ever feel pressured or coerced, you call me immediately." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I just want to make sure I have a say in my own life." He patted my hand. "You do, Evelyn. And I'll make sure of it." When I returned home, I found Mark waiting on the porch. He stood as I approached, his face tight with worry, or was it frustration? "Where have you been, Mom? I've been calling." I held up my purse. "I had errands to run. I'm not a prisoner in my own home, Mark." He frowned, glancing at the envelope in my hand. "What's that?" "Just some paperwork," I replied, breezing past him into the house. That evening Lisa called. Her voice was tense, brittle. "Mom, we're all just trying to help. You have to let us." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Lisa, I love you. But I'm still capable of making my own decisions. I need you to respect that." There was a long silence, then a quiet, "Okay, Mom. I hear you." But I wasn't sure she did. The next day, I noticed small changes around the house. The spare key was missing from its usual spot. My checkbook, which I always kept in the kitchen drawer, had been moved. I found a stack of unopened mail on the hall table, mail I was certain I hadn't put there. I felt a chill run down my spine. Were my children trying to make it look like I was forgetful? Were they setting the stage for something bigger? I decided to keep a journal, just as Margaret had suggested. Every day I wrote down what I did, who I saw, any unusual occurrences. I made copies of important documents and gave them to Margaret for safekeeping. I even installed a small camera by the front door just in case. I wasn't paranoid, I was prepared. A week later, Mark and Lisa arrived together, their faces grave. "Mom, we need to talk," Mark began, his voice heavy with false sympathy. "We've scheduled a tour of a wonderful assisted living facility. Just come and see it. No pressure." I looked at them, my heart pounding. "I told you I'm not interested." Lisa reached for my hand, her grip tight. "Please, Mom. Just one visit. For us." I saw the desperation in her eyes, the determination in Mark's. I realized then that they weren't going to take no for an answer. Reluctantly, I agreed to go. I told myself it was just a visit, nothing more. But as we drove to the facility, I felt a sense of dread settle over me. The building was new, clean, and utterly soulless. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the staff smiled with practiced politeness. We toured the common areas, the dining room, the activity center. Everywhere I looked, I saw people sitting alone, staring at the television or out the window, their faces blank. After the tour, the director led us to a small office. "We'd love to have you join our community, Mrs. Carter," she said, her smile too wide. Mark and Lisa looked at me expectantly. I forced a smile. "Thank you, but I'm not ready to make a decision." Mark's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. On the drive home, the silence was heavy, each of us lost in our own thoughts. That night, I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window overlooking the garden. I watched the sun set, the sky painted in shades of gold and pink. I thought about the life I'd built, the battles I'd fought, the love I'd given. I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. The next morning I called Margaret. "They're pushing harder," I said, my voice trembling. She listened, then said, "You have to stand your ground, Evie. Don't let them bully you. This is your life." Her words gave me strength. I decided then and there that I would not be moved, not by guilt, not by pressure, not by fear. The following week, the air in my house felt different, charged, as if a storm was coming. I went about my days with a new sense of vigilance. I double-checked the locks at night, kept my journal close, and made sure to answer every phone call with a clear, steady voice. I wanted no one to say I sounded confused or forgetful. I even started inviting my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, over for tea more often. She was a sharp woman, always up on the neighborhood news, and I trusted her to notice if anything seemed off. One afternoon, as I was pruning the rose bushes, I saw Mark's car pull up. He got out, not alone this time, but with Emily, the social worker. My heart thudded in my chest. I wiped my hands on my apron and met them at the door. "Good afternoon, Mom," Mark said, his tone too bright. Emily smiled, her clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Carter, we just wanted to check in. May we come in?" I nodded, stepping aside, but I kept my eyes on them. They sat at the kitchen table, Emily asking questions about my daily routine, my medications, my finances. I answered each one calmly, making sure to mention the meals I cooked, the errands I ran, the friends I saw. I could see Mark growing impatient, tapping his fingers on the table. Finally, Emily closed her folder. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. You seem very capable. If you ever need any resources, please let me know." She handed me a card, her eyes kind but searching. I smiled, tucking the card into my pocket. After she left, Mark lingered. "Mom, you can't keep pretending everything's fine. We're just trying to help." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the fear behind his frustration. "I know you're worried, Mark, but I'm not ready to give up my home. Not yet." He shook his head, defeated. "You're so stubborn." I smiled. "I learned from the best." That evening I wrote everything down in my journal, the questions Emily asked, the way Mark looked at me, the feeling in the air. I called Mr. Harris and updated him. "Just keeping you in the loop," I said. He chuckled. "You're more organized than most of my younger clients, Evelyn. Don't let them push you around." The next day Lisa called. Her voice was softer, almost pleading. "Mom, I know you think we're being overbearing, but we just want you to be safe. What if something happens and you're alone?" I took a deep breath. "Lisa, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not alone. I have friends, neighbors, and I know how to ask for help. Please trust me." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Okay, Mom. I'll try. But the pressure didn't let up. Mark started showing up unannounced, letting himself in with the spare key. I began locking the door from the inside, forcing him to knock. He didn't like that. "Why are you locking me out, Mom?" he demanded one morning. "Because it's my house," I replied, meeting his gaze. "And I deserve privacy." He muttered something under his breath and left. That afternoon, I found a letter in the mail from a local assisted living facility. It was addressed to me, but the handwriting on the envelope was Lisa's. Inside was a note. "Just think about it, Mom. We love you." I tore it up and threw it away. I started to notice other things too. My prescription bottles were moved from their usual spot. The calendar on the fridge had appointments I didn't remember making. I found a stack of unpaid bills in the trash, bills I knew I'd paid. It was as if someone was trying to create a trail of forgetfulness, a pattern of neglect. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. If they thought I was going to let them gaslight me into a nursing home, they had another thing coming. I called Margaret again. "They're trying to make it look like I can't manage," I said, my voice shaking. She was silent for a moment, then said, "You need witnesses, Evie. People who can vouch for you. Start inviting friends over more often. Let them see you're fine." I took her advice. I hosted a small tea party, inviting Mrs. Patel, Margaret, and 2 other neighbors. We laughed, shared stories, and I made sure everyone saw me bustling around the kitchen, serving food, pouring tea, cleaning up. I wanted them to remember this in case anyone ever asked. A few days later, I received a call from Emily, the social worker. "Mrs. Carter, I just wanted to check in. Is everything all right at home?" I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Emily, I appreciate your concern, but I feel like my children are trying to push me into a nursing home before I'm ready. I'm still capable, and I want to stay in my home." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Thank you for telling me. If you ever feel pressured or unsafe, please call me." Promised I would. That night I sat in my chair, watching the moon rise over the garden. I thought about all the ways my life had changed in the past few months. I felt tired but not defeated. I was determined to hold on to my independence no matter what it took. The next morning I called Mr. Harris again. "I want to set up a meeting with all 3 of my children," I said. "In your office. I want everything out in the open." He agreed, and we scheduled the meeting for the following week. I spent the days leading up to it gathering my documents, organizing my thoughts, and rehearsing what I would say. I was nervous, but I knew it was time to confront the situation head-on. When the day arrived, I dressed carefully, choosing my favorite blue dress and pearl earrings. I wanted to look strong, capable, and in control. I arrived at Mr. Harris's office early, my heart pounding. Mark, Lisa, and David arrived together, their faces tense. We sat around the conference table, Mr. Harris at the head. He began, "Evelyn has asked for this meeting to clarify her wishes regarding her living situation and her estate. I want everyone to listen carefully." I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice steady. "I appreciate your concern, but I am not ready to leave my home. I have updated my will and power of attorney to reflect my wishes. If I ever need help, I will ask for it. Until then, I expect you to respect my decisions." Mark started to protest, but Mr. Harris held up a hand. "Your mother is of sound mind and fully capable of making her own choices. If you attempt to coerce or force her into a facility against her will, there will be legal consequences." The room was silent. I looked at my children, seeing the shock and hurt in their eyes. But I also saw something else, respect, grudging but real. After the meeting, I felt lighter than I had in months. I knew the battle wasn't over, but I had drawn a line in the sand. I was ready for whatever came next. The days after the meeting at Mr. Harris's office were strangely quiet. My children didn't call as often, and when they did, their voices were careful, almost formal. I could sense the distance, the way they were recalibrating their approach. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settle over my home. I spent my mornings in the garden, my afternoons reading by the window, and my evenings talking with Margaret or Mrs. Patel over the phone. I savored the return of my solitude, the gentle rhythm of days that belonged to me alone. But peace, I knew, was a fragile thing. It didn't take long for the next storm to gather. One Thursday morning, as I was baking a batch of scones, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mark standing on the porch, his face drawn and serious. "Can I come in, Mom?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside. He sat at the kitchen table, watching as I moved around the kitchen. "I'm sorry about the other day," he said quietly. We worry about you." I set a plate of scones in front of him and poured us both some tea. "I know you do, Mark, but you have to let me live my life." He nodded, staring into his cup. "It's just hard. After Dad died, I promised him I'd look after you." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Looking after me doesn't mean taking away my choices." He smiled a little sadly. "You're tougher than any of us, Mom." I laughed, the tension easing between us. For a moment it felt like old times, just a mother and her son, sharing tea and memories. But I knew better than to let my guard down completely. That weekend Lisa called. Her voice was softer, more tentative. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe we pushed too hard. I just want you to be happy." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you, Lisa. That means more than you know." We talked for a while about the garden, the neighbors, the book I was reading. It was the first real conversation we'd had in months. But David was another story. He called late one night, his voice tight with frustration. "Mom, I don't understand why you're being so stubborn. We're just trying to help." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "David, I love you. But this is my life. I need you to respect that." He muttered something under his breath and hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the house, wondering if he would ever understand. The next week, I received a letter from the assisted living facility. It was a formal invitation to an open house, complete with a schedule of events and a personal note from the director. I recognized Lisa's handwriting on the envelope. I sighed, tossing it onto the pile of brochures I'd collected over the past months. I wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of justifying my existence, tired of being seen as a problem to be solved. I decided to take Margaret's advice and focus on the things that brought me joy. I joined a book club at the local library, started volunteering at the community center, and signed up for a painting class. I filled my days with purpose, determined to prove to myself, if no one else, that I was still capable of living a full, independent life. One afternoon, as I was leaving the community center, I ran into Emily, the social worker. She smiled warmly. "Mrs. Carter, it's good to see you out and about." I smiled back, feeling a surge of pride. "I'm keeping busy," I said. She nodded. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." I thanked her and walked to my car, feeling lighter than I had in months. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a commotion outside. I looked out the window and saw Mark and Lisa arguing on the front lawn. I opened the door, stepping onto the porch. "What's going on?" I called. They stopped, turning to face me. Mark's face was red, his fists clenched. "Lisa wants to call Adult Protective Services," he spat. "She thinks you're not safe here alone." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I just want what's best for you, Mom." I felt a wave of anger and sadness crash over me. "I am not a child," I said, my voice trembling. "I do not need to be rescued. If you can't respect my wishes, then maybe you should stay away." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mark stormed off, slamming his car door. Lisa stood on the lawn, tears streaming down her face. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. That night, I called Mr. Harris. "What happens if they call Adult Protective Services?" I asked, my voice shaking. He reassured me. "As long as you are of sound mind and able to care for yourself, there's nothing they can do. But keep your journal, and make sure your friends and neighbors know what's going on." I thanked him, feeling a little better. The next day, I invited Mrs. Patel and Margaret over for lunch. I told them everything about the pressure from my children, the threats to call APS, the constant feeling of being watched. They listened, offering comfort and support. "You're not alone, Evie," Margaret said, squeezing my hand. "We'll vouch for you if anyone asks." I spent the next few days documenting everything, every phone call, every visit, every strange occurrence. I made copies of my journal and gave them to Mr. Harris. I was determined to protect myself no matter what. One morning I woke to find a strange car parked in front of my house. A woman got out, clipboard in hand, and walked up the path. I opened the door before she could knock. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice calm. She introduced herself as a caseworker from Adult Protective Services. "We received a call expressing concern about your well-being, Mrs. Carter. May I come in?" I nodded, inviting her inside. She asked questions, looked around the house, checked the kitchen, the bathroom, the medicine cabinet. I answered every question clearly, showed her my journal, introduced her to Mrs. Patel, who happened to be visiting. The caseworker smiled, satisfied. "You seem perfectly capable, Mrs. Carter. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call." I thanked her, relief flooding through me as she left. That evening I sat in my chair, watching the sun set over the garden. I felt a sense of triumph, quiet but fierce. They had tried to trick me, to push me out of my own life. But I had outsmarted them all. The days that followed were some of the most peaceful I'd had in a long time. The threat of being forced out of my home had passed, at least for now. I found myself breathing easier, sleeping better, and even laughing more. Margaret and Mrs. Patel became regular fixtures in my life, stopping by for tea, helping in the garden, or just sitting with me on the porch as we watched the world go by. I realized how much I'd missed simple companionship, the kind that didn't come with strings or hidden agendas. But even as I enjoyed this newfound calm, I knew I couldn't let my guard down completely. My children's silence was a different kind of noise, one that made me wonder what they were planning next. I kept up my routines, stayed active in the community, and made sure to keep my journal up to date. I even started writing letters to myself, little reminders of the things I'd accomplished each day. Proof that I was still capable, still present, still me. One afternoon, as I was tending to the roses, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Lisa standing at the gate, her face pale and drawn. "Can we talk, Mom?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, leading her to the porch. We sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally she spoke. "I'm sorry, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. I got scared. After Dad died, I felt like I had to take care of everyone. I thought I was doing the right thing." I reached over, taking her hand in mine. "I know you meant well, Lisa, but you have to let me live my life. I'm not ready to give up yet." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll try, Mom. I really will." We sat together for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe my children could learn to see me as I was, not as they feared I might become. The next day, I received a letter from David. It was short, almost abrupt, but there was a note of vulnerability in his words. "Mom, I'm sorry for pushing so hard. I just want you to be safe. I hope you can forgive me." I smiled as I read it, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I wrote back, telling him I loved him, that I understood his worry, but that I needed him to trust me. Mark, on the other hand, remained distant. He called occasionally, his tone clipped and formal, as if he were speaking to a business associate rather than his mother. I sensed his pride had been wounded, that he was struggling to accept my independence. I hoped in time he would come around. As the weeks passed, I threw myself into my new activities. The book club became a highlight of my week, a place where I could share my thoughts and opinions without being second-guessed. The painting class awakened a creativity I hadn't felt in years, and I found joy in the simple act of putting brush to canvas. Volunteering at the community center gave me a sense of purpose, a reminder that I still had something to offer. One afternoon, as I was leaving the library, I ran into Emily again. She smiled genuinely this time. "You look happy, Mrs. Carter." I grinned. "I am Emily. I really am." She nodded, her eyes kind. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." I thanked her, feeling a sense of gratitude for the support I'd found in unexpected places. But even as I built this new life, I couldn't shake the feeling that another test was coming. My children had backed off, but I knew them too well to believe the matter was settled. I kept my journal close, updated my documents with Mr. Harris, and made sure my friends and neighbors knew what was happening. I was determined to be ready for whatever came next. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, the phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was softer than I'd heard in months. "Mom, can I come by tomorrow? I'd like to talk." I agreed, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and apprehension. The next day he arrived early, carrying a box of pastries from my favorite bakery. We sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with anticipation. He cleared his throat, looking down at his hands. I owe you an apology, Mom. I let my fear get the best of me. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was trying to control you. I'm sorry. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. Thank you, Mark. That means a lot. We talked for hours about Dad, about the past, about the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly listening to each other. He promised to respect my wishes, to trust me, to know what was best for myself. I believed him. That night I sat on the porch watching the stars blink to life in the darkening sky. I thought about everything I'd been through, the fear, the anger, the loneliness, the fight to hold on to my life. I realized that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I had faced down my own children, stood my ground, and reclaimed my independence. I knew there would be more challenges ahead. Aging is not for the faint of heart, and the world is not always kind to those who refuse to go quietly. But I was ready. I had my friends, my community, and most importantly, I had myself. As I closed my journal that night, I wrote one final line. They tried to trick me into a nursing home, but I outsmarted them all. And I meant every word. The summer rolled in, warm and golden, and with it came a sense of renewal. My garden flourished, the roses blooming in wild, defiant colors, and the tomatoes ripening on the vine. I found myself humming as I worked, the old aches in my bones softened by the satisfaction of tending to something that depended on me. The house, once filled with tension and suspicion, now felt like a sanctuary again. I opened the windows, let the breeze carry in the scent of cut grass and honeysuckle, and filled the rooms with music and laughter. Margaret and Mrs. Patel became my partners in mischief. We started a little tradition. Every Friday afternoon, we'd gather on my porch with lemonade and cookies, sharing stories and gossiping about the neighborhood. Sometimes other neighbors would join us, drawn by the sound of our laughter. I realized that, in fighting for my independence, I'd also built a community around myself. I was no longer just an old woman living alone. I was a friend, a confidant, a pillar of the block. One Friday, as we sat in the shade, Mrs. Patel leaned over and whispered, "You know, Evelyn, you've become a bit of a legend around here." I laughed, shaking my head. A legend? For what? Being stubborn? Margaret grinned. For standing up for yourself. For showing everyone that getting older doesn't mean giving up. I felt a flush of pride, unexpected and sweet. Maybe I thought there was something to be said for being a little stubborn. But life, as always, had its surprises. One afternoon, I received a letter from the community center. They were starting a new program for seniors, peer support, legal advice, and workshops on maintaining independence. They wanted me to speak at the kickoff event, to share my story. First, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to relive the ordeal, to open old wounds in front of strangers. But Margaret convinced me. You could help someone else, Evie. You could show them they're not alone. So I agreed. The day of the event, I stood in front of a room full of faces, some young, some old, all watching me with a mix of curiosity and hope. I told them about my children, about the pressure, the fear, the loneliness. I told them about the journal, the meetings with Mr. Harris, the visits from social workers and case managers. I told them how I'd fought, not just for my home, but for my right to decide what happened to me. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then slowly people began to clap. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. An older man nodded, his jaw set with determination. Afterward, people came up to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. I realized then that my struggle hadn't just been for me. It was for all of us who refused to be written off, who demand to be seen and heard. That night, as I sat on the porch with Margaret and Mrs. Patel, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had turned my pain into purpose, my fear into strength. I had found my voice, and in doing so, I had helped others find theirs. The weeks passed, and life settled into a new, comfortable rhythm. My children called more often, but the conversations were different now, lighter, more respectful. Lisa sent me photos of her kids, Mark shared stories from work, and even David, from 2 states away, made an effort to check in. There were still moments of tension, still reminders of the battle we'd fought, but there was also a new understanding between us. They saw me now not as a burden, but as a person with her own needs and desires. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, I sat in the garden with Lisa. She watched me as I pruned the roses, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, Mom," she said quietly, "I never realized how strong you were. I always thought I had to protect you, but maybe I was just afraid of losing you." I set down my shears and took her hand. "We're all afraid of losing the people we love, Lisa. But loving someone means letting them live their own life, even if it scares you." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Mom." I smiled, feeling the warmth of her words settle in my chest. "I'm proud of you too." As summer faded into fall, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the fear, the anger, the loneliness, but also the courage, the friendship, the unexpected joy. I realized that, in fighting for my independence, I had rediscovered parts of myself I thought I'd lost. I was more than just a mother, more than just a widow, more than just an old woman in a big house. I was Evelyn Carter, resilient, resourceful, and unbreakable. I knew there would be more challenges ahead. Life has a way of testing us, of pushing us to our limits. But I was ready. I had faced down the people I loved most, stood my ground, and emerged stronger for it. I had outsmarted them all, not with anger or bitterness, but with patience, determination, and a little help from my friends. As I sat on the porch that evening, watching the leaves turn gold and crimson, I felt a sense of gratitude for the life I'd built, for the battles I'd fought, and for the peace I'd finally found. I knew deep down that I would never let anyone take that away from me again. The first frost came early that year, dusting the garden in silver and reminding me that time moves forward, no matter how fiercely we try to hold it still. I pulled my old wool sweater tighter around my shoulders and stepped outside, breathing in the crisp morning air. The roses had faded, but their thorns remained, sharp, protective, a reminder that beauty and strength often grow side by side. Inside, the house was warm and filled with the scent of cinnamon and apples. I baked a pie for Margaret, who had caught a cold, and left it on her doorstep with a note. "For the friend who taught me to fight." Mrs. Patel called to thank me for the cookies I'd sent her way, and we laughed about the days when we were young mothers, chasing children through the park and dreaming of quiet afternoons. Now, in this new season of life, we found comfort in each other's company, in the small acts of kindness that stitched our days together. My children visited more often, but the visits were different now. They came not to check up on me, but to share their lives, to ask for advice, to simply be together. Mark brought his daughter, who sat at my kitchen table and asked me to teach her how to bake bread. Lisa helped me sort through old photo albums, and we laughed until we cried at the memories we uncovered. Even David, who had always kept his distance, called to say he was planning a visit for Thanksgiving. I felt the old wounds healing, replaced by something softer, more forgiving. One evening, as I sat by the window, watching the lights flicker on in the houses up and down the street, I thought about everything I had learned. I realized that outsmarting my children hadn't just been about keeping my home, it had been about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, my right to choose. I had shown them and myself that age is not a weakness but a different kind of strength. That love, even when it hurts, can be the force that brings us back to ourselves. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, I found peace in the quiet moments, in the turning of the seasons, in the laughter of friends, in the simple joy of living life on my own terms. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the storm and come through it, not untouched but unbroken. They tried to trick me into a nursing home, but I outsmarted them all. And in doing so, I found not just my freedom, but a new beginning.